It's funny how certain things that you hear early in your progression, early in your training, stick with you. And when it comes to Jiu-Jitsu, one of the first things I ever heard way back in the day, we're talking the late 80s, was the idea of survive first, win later. Survive first and win later. And then this was reinforced by all the videos and all the early UFCs. You watch Rickson versus Zulu. Rickson, pretty athletic guy, fighting Zulu, very athletic guy. Rickson, reasonably muscular guy. Zulu, very muscular guy. And it took a while for Rickson to win. Of course, if Zulu had turned around and he lifted his head up, Rickson would have jumped on his back and choked him. Of course, Rickson would have won right away if he'd had the choice. But he was fighting a guy who was trained in Jiu-Jitsu, was bigger, was stronger, was very athletic, and had a ton of experience fighting Vale Tudo, fighting MMA. So the procedure was survive first, don't lose, then win later. Similarly, when I watched Royce fight Dan Severn in the early UFCs, I was pretty convinced that Royce was onto something, but I was like, there's no way he can win. He's fighting a guy who's 240, 250 pounds, just this animal. And what did Royce do? It took him 15 minutes, I think, but he survived first. He used the guard to survive first and then win later. He eventually tired him out. And this is the right procedure, right? You can't win later if you lose first. If you die first, there is no winning later. If you get kicked out of the match because you got tapped out, there is no winning later. And it's amazing how many times this saying comes into my mind. When I was on my recent last canoe trip, there were times when, it'd be storming, it'd be raining, it would be untenable to go out into the water. It'd be untenable to travel that day. Survive first, win later. So surviving first means not going out that day. It means doing everything else you can do to get yourself set up for success. But if you went out there right now, you would lose. So you don't go out there and you wait for the weather to change. Then you go and you win later. Same thing in the past when I've gone through some really difficult financial times. And you go from living in a nice apartment, having a family, to being divorced, living in a basement apartment that you would be embarrassed to have lived in as a student, trying to raise a couple of kids, almost all your income gone, all your assets gone. That's not the time to swing for the fences and try and win right away. What do? Well, first you hunker down. First you go to the mattresses. What can I get rid of? What expenses can I get rid of? How can I bring a little bit of money in? How can I feed myself? How can I feed my kids? How can I survive first? Then you start scheming on how to win later. In a situation like that, you can't win right then. Winning right then would be saying, you know what? I've got $300 in my bank account. I'm going to go buy a whole bunch of lottery tickets and maybe one of those will win. Generally, not a good strategy. That's not surviving first. That's trying to win first. That's getting the sequence wrong. Survive first, win later. That'd be like Rickson going, this Zulu guy is pretty scary. I know, I'm going to go and try and knock him out with a big right hook. Maybe that big right hook lands. Maybe. Probably it won't. Maybe it lands and doesn't knock him out. And now he's in a terrible position. That's not a good strategy. That's like going to spend all your money on lottery tickets and hoping against hope that one of them comes through. So this idea of survive first, win later is one of the very, very first things I ever heard in my jiu-jitsu journey. It's amazing how often I tell that to myself, both when I'm on the mat and when I'm off the mat.